So the pattern has been picked, the fabric has been cut out. Now it's time to assemble the baby quilt for little baby Kowalski that's due very soon. Now, one of the projects I plan to work on here in Kentucky was the quilt, because here I have a lot more time than I have at home because of my work schedule. Now, I've come up with a problem, and I'm gonna let you see what you think about it. We're gonna work on it together, so come on. Hey friends, it's Barbara Sue at Kowalski Mountain. Welcome back to our channel. If you haven't seen the other videos, this is the next video in the series. I am making a baby quilt for our next grandson. Now, I've run into a little problem and I think I have a solution for it, but we're gonna look at it together and see what I come up with. After I cut up all the pieces and I put them in bags and I labeled the pieces with the letter on it, which I'm really glad I did that, I noticed that there's not a lot of definition between these colors, and I'm a little worried about that. Now, when you look at the original pieces, the big pieces, there's a pretty good contrast, and I'm happy with that. But when I cut them out, it's pretty good. It's okay. Let's lay it out. We're going to make sure before we sew this that I'm happy with it, because once we sew it, there's no going back. So this is the pattern that I'm doing. It's called Ribbon Quilt, and this is from the Around the Block quilt, or this one's Once More Around the Block. This is one of the other books in the series. I have 2 books. And the way these work is this is a rotary cutting pattern. It tells you how to cut the squares, how to cut them in half, and then you piece them together in segments. And this is a 3-grid block, so I'm going to piece it together in 3 sections and then sew those together. And in the end, we have a quilt. Now, because of the way this is designed, we can really push some fabric and we can mass produce the blocks. Now, this block I think has, I forgot now, I think there's 16 blocks in this entire quilt that we're doing, 8 green, 8 blue, and we're just going to mass produce them. This is my big job to do while I'm here in Kentucky, is to get this baby quilt top assembled. So cross our fingers, I'll be able to do it. So what I'm going to do is we're going to lay this out and we're going to look at it before we sew anything and make sure I'm happy with the contrast, because I do have an idea that might work instead if I need to take an alternative. So let's see what it looks like. So we've got our center square. Here's our center square. Let's see, I've got A, B, C, and D. Okay. And then these are going to fan off of the center. And I want to make sure I get them all right. I just did that wrong. Here we go, like this. Something's looking wrong. Side, 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 side. Okay, there we go. So that's our center. Then here in the middle, we're going to, actually I'm already okay with that. Like, it already looks fine. Oh good, I've been so worried about this. And then these, I almost think I want to put these in here. way. And then these, go like this. Okay, so I'm fine with that. I think the contrast is fine. Well, this is a lot better than I expected. I've been so worried about this, but I'm happy with that. The contrast is going to be good. Now, I'm just going to lay out the green one just to put my eyes on it and see what it looks like. And tomorrow, we're going to start sewing. Okay, here they are. Tomorrow is sewing day. I'm going to bring you along. I have a very lofty goal. I want to get all 16 blocks done tomorrow. I don't know if that can happen, but I don't have much time here at Kowalski Mountain, and I've got to get this done. So let's see if I can do it. So let's go ahead and look at our pattern. So this is the ribbon quilt. It's a 3-unit grid. And so what that means is we're going to do this in rows. So the first thing I'll do is I'll sew these A pieces and the D pieces together, and some C and some A, and then an A and a D. And I'll just sew all those into those little squares. I'll make these triangles back into squares. And then I'll kind of do the same thing with these. Sewing those together, sewing these, and then sewing those into a line. And then the same on this side, sewing the two together to make it into a square. And then when I have 3 pieces, I'm going to pin those on the points, and I will sew those 2 pieces, and I'll have a quilt. We're going to do this in bulk. So I'm going to sew all of these pieces together in one long line, like all of these 2. I'm going to sew them in one long line until I have enough for all 16 blocks. Same with this piece. I'm going to sew enough for all 16 blocks in one long line, and then I'll cut them apart, and then I'll press them, and then we'll start piecing them together. So I have all of my pieces laid out. I've got A, B, C, and D in order just for myself so I don't mess them up. I'm going to be sewing these in an assembly line fashion. So I'm going to sew each piece, every single piece I'm going to need for the block, and then they're slowly going to come together. And then all of a sudden, we're going to have 8 blocks all together at the same time. So I like this method of sewing. That's why I love this book, because it makes it so easy to be able to push out a quilt like this. So let's get started. Now I'm referencing the photos I took of the layouts that I made, just so I don't mess up any of my pieces. So my first blocks, I'm going to be needing my A piece and my C piece. My A is this dark blue, and then the light is the light blue, and those are the pieces we're going to start with. So A and C, and we're going to line them up, and we're going to sew them. One down. So I went ahead and I counted out 32 of just one piece, and that way I know when I get to the end I should have as many as I need. Now I don't cut the thread between each piece, I just let it go in one long strand. When you're quilting, you use 1/4-inch seams, and you also don't do any backup stitches, you know, to lock the stitches. Honestly, I don't know why. But you don't, and I never have. And my quilts have not fallen apart. Now you see me being a little bit fussy about lining up my pieces. Little mistakes become big mistakes. So it's much better to take your time to do things right and not have big problems later. Now, if you've sewn with me before, you know I have a motto that the seam ripper is your friend. And no one ever thinks it's your friend, but it is. I'm sure that we're going to get reacquainted with my seam ripper before this project is over. Now we have done the first set of pieces, all 32 of them, all assembly lined together. And you can cut them all apart if you want to at this point, or you can leave them together. I am going to cut them apart because I don't want to leave them in a heap to get wrinkled. Now it's super easy. You're just going to cut the pieces right in between. There should be just a little tiny thread in between. You just snip that. If it's really long, you can snip it up, but I'm not going to get fussy about it. Alright, first pieces are done. We're going to set those to the side, and now we're going to do the next pieces. Now this piece is going to be a C and an A. So now we're doing this middle block right here. So I need the little florally print, which it's not really floral, it's kind of like ink blotches, and my main star color. And we're going to do the exact same thing that we just did this time. We also need 32 of this one. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out, or count these out. There should be 32 here, and we're going to go ahead and sew it together just like we did the other ones, making a long line of assembly lined blocks. These are done. Let's count them and cut them. Now I have a couple of pieces that I got a little too close together. So I told you we would need this seam ripper before this project was over. So I'm just gonna snip those threads to separate these. All right, so now we have the C and A pieces are done, and the A and D pieces are done. So those are all of the exteriors, and then we have our center block. Now this is where the quilt is gonna start coming together. But first, we have a very important step that cannot be overlooked. It's the pressing. Now, I'm not a fan of ironing. I never have been. I don't even like to iron my clothes. But this is not a step you can skip in sewing. Now, some people do what they call finger pressing, where they'll take it and they'll just press it with their finger. I don't really see the value in finger pressing. There's nothing like putting a hot iron on it to really set the seam. So ironing is the next step. Now I have this iron set for cotton, and I have it on a steam setting. I'm not sure I can do this sitting down. Now I am going to press away from the lighter fabric. There might be a better decision on that, but that's how I want it to be, because you can actually see the fabric through the lighter fabrics, and I don't want that. So I'm going to press away from the lighter fabric. So I'm going to lay my lighter fabric down on the bottom, and I'm just going to press away. Now you can see how much more efficient this would be than finger pressing. It's not, my iron is pretty hot, even though I didn't really preheat it at all. So this is going by pretty quickly. Now when I had a large sewing room, I would have the ironing board set up, and I didn't actually have a large sewing room. My son was in college, and so his room was the sewing room. He wasn't using it, so it makes a huge difference when you have a dedicated space for sewing, because you can work on a project and just walk away and leave the mess, which was awesome. In the RV, I obviously cannot do that. This is the dining room, and we will be dining later. So all of my mess has to be cleaned up by the end of the day. Now I don't know if you can see, I think you can. I have a towel underneath my ironing board. It keeps the iron from moving around so much. Now I could have done all this sewing for all the blocks, like do the green and the blue at the same time, just for ease of organization and space, so I don't make mistakes. I'm just breaking it up. I'm doing all the blues, and then I'm going to do all the greens. Now I started quilting when my kids were babies. Faith, my youngest daughter, was a baby, so I had 3 kids at that time, and believe it or not, I had more time for sewing then than I do now. I was a stay-at-home mom then, and I had much more time to dedicate to my family and myself than I do now. Now, if you've ever seen any of my videos in my dining room, I have a quilt that hangs in my dining room. It's called the Northern Lights quilt, and I'm going to put a picture up here for you. That was the very first quilt that I made. Now, I had sewed before, but not quilting, and I made that in a Quilters Guild on Fort Belvoir in Fairbanks, Alaska. And it was a great group of ladies. I learned so much from those ladies, and I love that quilt. It's still my favorite one that I ever made. My friend Hannah really mentored me on that quilt, and on the back, it's all hand quilted. It's machine pieced on the top. It's got some hand applique. It's got several techniques of applique in it. And on the back, Hannah told me just put any old fabric on the back. And I did. And I came to her house, and I've been quilting away, so I've done a lot of sewing already. And she looked at it and she went, "Oh my gosh, why did you use this fabric?" And I said, "Well, you said to use any old thing." And she said, "I didn't mean that. I put camouflage fabric on the back of that quilt that is precious to me." And Hannah quickly learned that that's not how you word it. I should have used like a linen or something much nicer so that you could see my stitching. But it has camouflage on the back. I had a lot of that camouflage fabric, and that is on the back of my quilt. Alright, let's get on to the next step. So now this is where it's going to get where I really have to pay attention. Because if I turn a piece from this direction to this direction, that changes the entire outlook of the block. So I need to be careful to make sure that I do this correctly. So to assemble these blocks, I've decided to go ahead and lay out the pieces in stacks. That way I don't make mistakes, because if I turn these the wrong way, it changes the whole pattern. So it's really important that I do it right. So I'm going to go ahead and stack them all up. Okay, so I've got my pattern, and the white pieces are this color. So I've got this one's correct, this one's correct, this one is not correct. See, this is what I'm double checking. So the white goes out there, yep, this is out here. Now this is that florally pattern right there, so that's here, 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 and here. So I think it's correct. So I've got a star coming off, and then I've got my blues in the corner. I think that's right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take from our stacks, and you always put right sides together. So we're going to line these up nicely so that they're nice and straight, and then we're going to sew that together. And we're going to do the same thing for all 8 in the stack. And we can still assemble these quickly, you know, by mass assembling them. So now we'll take the 2 pieces that we sewed together, we'll line up the 3rd piece. So we're going to have the first section of our grid done, and we'll sew those together. And we just continue until all of the 8 pieces are put together in this grid. So again, you always do right sides together. I think I like laying the pieces out like this. I've never done this before, that I can remember anyway. Let's just preface it with that. But I like, just because these are so fussy, if I turn them the wrong way, I mess it up. Alright, so the 3-piece grids are already sewed together, and I made sure they are pressed and they're laid out in the exact order that they need to be. Now this is where it's going to start to become a quilt block. Now it's also where any mistakes are going to start to show up. So if my cutting isn't perfect, or if my seams aren't perfect, all of that's going to come out right now. I can pin my seams, which sometimes I do. I'm just going to see if I think they need to be pinned. I'm going to pin one just to see what I think. Not too bad, so I can probably definitely get away without pinning. So there's the first one, and you can still mass produce these if you want to. I'm just going to work them slow. And there it is, the first block. Looks the way it's supposed to, so this is going to get pressed. And then we're going to go on to the green. So 7 more blue ones, and then we can start assembling the green blocks exactly the way we did the blue. All 8 blocks are assembled, and they're not perfect, but I've always been told that the Amish believe that a perfect quilt is unlucky, and so they purposely make a mistake so not to have an unlucky quilt. And I'm lucky enough that I don't have to purposely make mistakes. Now that I have Amish neighbors, I can ask them if they really believe that, because I've always been told that. So now I'm going to press these, and then we're going to move on to the green blocks, and I'm going to come back to you after the green blocks are assembled, and we'll go to the next step. Alright friends, I have one more day in Kentucky, and I've got to get as much done on this quilt as I possibly can, because when I get home and get back to my real life and have to go to work, this gets a lot more complicated. So let's see if we can get this top done. That's my goal. I did finish the green blocks. So here's the green blocks. There are 8 of them, and I'm pretty happy with them. I'm kind of wishing I did one thing that I considered. I had considered putting the light green in the blue block and the light blue in the green block. And I considered it, and I didn't even lay it out, and I didn't do it. And I kind of wish I did. But green and blue do go nicely together, so it's going to be fine. I should have explored that a little bit more, but it's okay. Now I've separated out these blocks because they have some imperfections. So the edges maybe aren't quite even, like this has got a really long edge on it. It's not even. That happens. I am not, while I am a perfectionist at heart, it doesn't always come out that way. So I want to measure these out to see if I need to do any trimming. Now, I don't like to trim them up too much, because if I do that, then they will be smaller and my quilt will be smaller, and you have to cut everything evenly, and I don't really, you know, it's kind of a slippery slope to do that. So what that did was that squared it up. I'm going to do this very cautiously with this. You have to be very careful. So like this edge right here is a little bit long. Try to cut it on this side so you can see. I'm not left-handed. So all we need to cut off is that little piece right there. And now that's nice and straight. Edges. So now it is time to move on to sashing. Now, sashing in a quilt is the border in between each block. And not every quilt has sashing. I typically use sashing. It's a good way to make the quilt a little bit bigger. You have to be careful. On my last granddaughter's quilt, I made the sashing too big and the quilt came out really big. So I'm not going to make that mistake again. So this is going to have a 1-inch sashing, which means I need to cut it at 1.5 inches so that the finished edge is 1 inch. So last night I figured it up and I need 37 pieces of sashing to fit this quilt. Now they need to be cut at, this is where it needed to be perfect. See, these are like 7 3/4. Yeah. 7 3/4. That's what we're going to do. So what I'm going to do, I've already ironed my fabric. I'm trying to be really careful because this leftover white is going to be the center medallion of the quilt, and I don't want to cut it too small. So I think this is going to give me about 24. I need 37. I'm going to just have to cut 1-inch pieces off the side because, what are we at? Yeah, we're really tight. I think I'm going to need that much, 15 inches of it, which only gives me a few pieces. Yikes, yikes. This is going to be plenty to make that center. I just wanted to be careful not to cut myself short. Now the other thing that I need to cut is in between. So let me show you. So I've got my block. I'm going to have my sashing here. And here. So in these corners right here is going to be color, just a little 1.5 inch square. The binding and the back of the quilt is going to be this blue. And the reason is because I liked it better. I like this fabric a lot. I try not to do florally things for boy quilts, and this has kind of a floral pattern to it. Not a strong florally pattern, but that was the main reason I did not pick this one as the back of the quilt, just because I don't really like florals in boy quilts, and I love this fabric. I actually think this fabric is in my son's quilt. That's how much I really like it. Alright, so we're to the point of the quilt making process that I can lay it out and try to get a feel for what it's going to really look like. I actually do like the colors together. They look really nice. So I'm kind of spacing them just a little bit to mimic the sashing. Now this is going to be my medallion. I'm going to leave it laid out on the floor as I work this next section. Now I'm going to piece this in sections. So I'm going to piece this in a row, this in a row, and then that in a row. And then these are going to be pieced together in a section, as are these, and those are going to go on the edge of the medallion. Now the medallion I'm going to frame out with the blues and the green fabrics. That dark blue and green is going to frame the middle. So the applique will not be that whole size. It'll be a good portion of it though. It's a big medallion, which I'm still on the fence about it, but it's going to be okay. All right, let's sew this together. Now, whereas that white fabric, I know we have enough, but I was having to be super careful with it. I actually think I have way too much blue. And I think the Joann's lady led me a little bit of astray on that. And I should have stopped and recalculated it, but I like the fabric, so it's okay. It can go to my stash. Overall, I think I did a really good job of figuring my fabric. I do have a little left, but really not much. So I'm pretty happy with that. I felt like I did a good job with my math, because you had to figure out how many inches and how many strips you would need, and it got a little complicated. But I feel like I did a pretty good job, because you always add extra because you don't want to run out, and I haven't run out, so that's good. It's a little hard to tell the right and the wrong side on this white fabric, so I'm trying to be careful. There is the first set of sashing. So blue, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is going to need to be pressed, of course. Okay. Now it's going to start becoming a quilt. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sew these rows of blocks together with just the sashing, and you notice there's no corner piece on it. There it is. Now we need to press it so we can attach the first row of sashing to the edge. And I'm having to juggle heat and iron because I can't do electric heat and the iron at the same time. So I have to juggle. Now the real test is going to be how well my sashing pieces and my colored corners match up. This will be the test. It won't be perfect. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that right now. Now I am going to use my pins to help me line up. So far, so good. One block. Remember how I told you little mistakes become big mistakes? This is where we see them. The good thing is the baby won't know, and honestly most other people won't know either. Some people will know, they'll look at it and go, oh gosh, her points don't match. So here's an area that I'm going to have to fudge a little bit, but most people are not going to know. Okay, let's do it. I wish I had dramatic music right now. I'll try to find some. Coming together, and I actually really like it. Oh, it's so hard to envision a project, and so I'm so glad when it comes together and it looks good. I like the bright colors. It's really, really nice. I'm excited. Okay, we're starting to make some real progress. We're going to piece these pieces of sashing into the rows of blocks. I've got two rows that I'm ready to piece together. And then I've got to figure out the medallion in the middle, and I am still really stuck on it. I'm hoping once I have this sewn together and I can re-look at my measurements a little bit, that it'll come together for me. This is where my inability to visualize really gets me, because I just can't see it. So I have to wait until I make a mistake, and then I can usually figure it out. It's usually plain as day then. But I think I'm close to a place where I can really put my eyes on the issue. What I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to frame that medallion to give it a little bit more of a border, and can't quite decide how to do that, but I want it to definitely be set apart from just the regular blocks. And that's where I'm really getting stuck. I do like the little pops of blue, the dark colors inside. I was a little leery about that, but it gives it a little pop, and I like that. I'm so happy with it. I can't wait to give it to Jess and Eric. Now I just need to figure out my medallion. Now what I figured out so far is I'm going to make a border with the dark blue and the dark green. And I'm going to set them off a little bit. So the blue is going to be a 1-inch border with a 1.5-inch green border, because I want to kind of frame the medallion. And I'm going to try to get fancy and do my corners fancy. We'll see if I can pull that off. I'm not sure. That's going to account for 1.5 inches of my border on each side. Now the way I'm going to figure this is I'm going to be using my pieced section, because I know they're finished size. So this is 17. So the center section is going to be 17.5 inches square. And so when it's finished, it's 17.25 inches square. That's what the finished, that means with the seam allowance, it needs to be 17.75. I need to write this better. 17.75 with seam allowance. Okay. So 5 of that 17.75 is border. So we are to 12.75 is our center square with the center. Okay, I think that's going to work. So 12.75 is my square. I need to cut that. I need to cut my blues and my greens. I'm going to try to make I'm not sure if that's called a mitered corner. I'm not sure you can read my gibberish, but when it meets here in the center, so we've got our corner and the two colors are going to meet there in the middle. I think that's a mitered corner. I'm not actually sure. I'm going to call it that. Sounds good. Sounds fancy. I'm not sure that's the right term. Okay, I think I'm ready to cut it and knock out this center piece. This is the medallion, and once this is cut and put in, then all that'll be left, all that'll be left will be to do the applique, to do the embroidery, because I'm going to embroider the baby's name on it, to quilt it and bind it. That's all that's left after this part. You can tell there's a lot left, so we're chiseling away at it. So you can tell I told you that I'm very visual. So I could not plan that medallion until I could measure it out and really see what it was going to be. And we're finally there. So I'm going to cut 1.5 inch pieces for the blue border. I'm going to cut 2-inch strips for the green border. And then I'm going to cut a 12.75 inch square for the center medallion. So because I'm making my fancy border, I need to leave plenty of space on each end. And I need to start in about 1/4 inch. Let me do it this side. So we're going to go ahead and press this. Now you're probably wondering why I left all this, and that's because I want to make the fancy corners. Now I'm going to show you how. Now I'm going to forewarn you, I haven't done this in a really long time. I'm thinking I've only done corners like this maybe once. So again, I'm going to have to really think through this. But I'm going to use my ironing lines to make these corners meet up in the corner to make a T. So rather than come together on top of each other, I want them to meet. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a little triangle. And maybe you can see this is what we're going for. And I'm going to use my iron to press it. And then if I've done it right, it's going to meet correctly. Yes. So now I'm going to use Now I'm going to use that ironing line as my sewing line. And I do not want this to come apart. Yay! I can definitely live with that. Now what I'll do is I'm going to cut this. I'm not going to get crazy with my cutting yet. I'm going to wait. But that looks pretty darn good. Very happy with that. Well, I told you my seam ripper is my friend. And I'm going to have to pull out those two seams. My center block is a little bit too big, and I gotta fix that. So my green won't be as pronounced as I wanted it to be, which that's a little disappointing, but it's okay. And the quilt will still be beautiful, and no one will know but me and all of you that watch my video. So let's just keep that between us. Okay. Now the really exciting part is that just 2 more seams and the quilt top will be done. Now, like I said, that doesn't mean the quilt is done. I still have to do the applique, and I have to quilt it, and I have to bind it. So there are quite a few steps left, but the top is almost done. Now, I usually do the applique before I piece the whole top. That that just wasn't going to work with this quilt and this trip, and I'm just trying to get stuff done, so that's why I'm doing it this way. Now at this point in the quilting, pinning is really important to line up my joints and points and make sure everything looks good. There's still some imperfection, but we do our best. Now I do want to make sure I have my blocks in the right order. Yep. No blues are touching blues. I'm so excited. Are you ready to see? Not bad. Not bad. One more row and it's together. Okay, are you ready to see it? Let me stand up. We did it! Honestly, you can't tell on that border at all. You can't tell at all, so it's fine. So now the applique needs to be done, and I have some ideas. Something a little woodsy, maybe with a deer or a tree, or I don't know. I have not found a pattern yet, so that will be in the next video. But this was my goal for the trip, to finish the top, and that is done, and so my goal is accomplished. So I'm so excited. Thank you so much for coming with me while I sewed this quilt top for baby Kowalski. Now if you haven't hit that subscribe button, hit that button, friends. Help our channel grow. We're almost to our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.